McNally, and I'm here to talk about Japanese maple pruning. If you're sitting here and that's not what you came for, then join the class and learn something about Japanese maples. I want to thank Garland for having me. I used to teach a lot of classes at the Arboretum I managed in Iowa and the nursery I worked at in Seattle. So I really like getting out and spreading I call it the pruning love, the plant love. And so we're going to talk in the beginning today, we're going to talk about the basics. You really got to understand the basics. It's hard to just jump right into a maple tree and explain it adequately without understanding the physiology of the tree, because once you understand the physiology or the science aspect or what the plant has the options of doing, then you get to work with it, not against it. So if anybody has any questions, you can certainly raise your hand at any time if it's sort of a short question. If it's a very specific question about a tree that you have in your garden, and I'm not talking about that function of the tree right at that moment, just hold it till the end. There will be about a half an hour for questions at the end. Can everybody hear me? Good. My mother was right. I'm a loudmouth. So one of the first things I like to cover with pruning maple trees, and there is a handout over here taped to the counter if you want to take pictures with your phone, if you don't want to have a piece of paper. There's certainly paper copies. I think they have some more if you need one. So this is just a loose outline about what I'm going to talk about. We're going to hit a lot of other fine points about it. So the first thing is having the right tool. If you don't have the right tool, you can't do the job right. Don't try to use a screwdriver on a nut. Horrible. It's not going to work right. You're not going to end up with the right outcome, and that's what you really want. So one of the things about pruning that I like to start out with is pruning is a cut. It's a single action. What you're doing with all of your pruning actions is training the tree. People say, oh, I want to prune my maple. Well, you can go out and make one cut, and you pruned it. What you're actually doing with that cut is telling the tree where it can or you don't want it to grow. And growing isn't making the weeping Japanese maple that was planted 3 feet from the corner of the driveway and the sidewalk smaller. This is not a class about making them smaller. That's not pruning. That's shearing. And if you have that situation, unfortunately, the weeping maple planted 3 feet from the corner of the driveway and the sidewalk, it, in my opinion, is the most misplanted plant in all of landscaping, because it's beautiful and architectural, and you want it to be by the front door. It's a focal point. And builders or people selling their house or just customers in general want to put that up there right by the front door. That's not necessarily the right place for it. If you go to downtown Albany, if you've been there, the courthouse there by where they have the farmers market, there is a massive weeping Japanese maple. It's very old. So they get big. You don't necessarily have to let them get that big, and I like to say people should live within their landscape lifestyle. It might be planted there for 20 years and be happy and healthy and not get too big. But then 25, 30, 40 years down the road, it might be too big. And that's just the life of a plant. They never stop growing. But they do slow down a little bit. And a lot of people always say, well, why do they call them dwarf Japanese maples? Well, dwarf doesn't mean stay small. And this is true with fruit trees. It's true with shrubs. Dwarf does not necessarily mean stay small. It means it grows between a third and half of what the mother plant that it came from speed. So a dwarf apple tree grows this much, a semi-dwarf apple tree grows this much, a standard apple tree grows this much a year. You can have a 50-foot tall dwarf maple right next to a 50-foot tall regular maple. The dwarf is just 150 years old and the regular maple is 50 years old. So understand that concept, and right plant, right place is a huge part of if you're planting a maple tree. Set it up for success. Don't plant the weeper right by the corner of the driveway and the sidewalk, unless you plan on moving it later. And that's part of a landscape lifestyle as well. Knowing that you're going to move it, but there's risk with moving. Disease, pests, stress, things like that. So the first thing I'm going to go over the tools. One of the most important things is keeping them clean. There are a few diseases, Verticillium Wilt being one of them, that is very detrimental to Japanese maples and many other plants. You can't spray for it. You can't treat for it. Once the tree has it, all you can do is try to minimize it. And it is devastating. I have customers up in the Seattle area who have lost 15, 20 maple trees because a careless landscaper before I got there came in and started making cuts and didn't clean their pruners, and they transferred Verticillium Wilt from the first thing they planted to the other 15 trees, and I battled it for 15 or 20 years. And 8 or 10 of them had to get thrown away. And you can't put another maple there because it's in the soil. So sanitation is critical. As a professional, I clean my pruners before I get to your house, and I clean my pruners before I leave your house. And I do that. I always tell people to clean your pruners before and after you use them, because you never know if you remembered the last time. I always say that to myself. So the best thing that I found to clean them with is either rubbing alcohol, and you just get a little bottle like this and put it in a little spritz bottle. Be aware that if you're going to set it on the shelf for a while, the little spritz bottles are porous, and the alcohol loses its potency over time. So I only put in the spritz bottle what I'm going to use for that day, just dump out the rest. So this is 70% rubbing alcohol. You can use 90. Just make sure it's a good rubbing alcohol. Other things that I've used for sanitation is WD-40. Lubricates as well, but once you get this on your hands, it's hard to hold on to your pruners because they're slippery. But this actually has a little bit of a disease-killing effect as well. But I like to use the rubbing alcohol because I know it's going to really do the job. Bleach is another option. I don't care for bleach because it pits metal. It will ruin your pruners, especially if you dunk them in there. Got to go do something, take care of something, you forget about them, you leave them in that jar of bleach, and pretty soon you come back and you got to buy a whole new set of pruners because it will eat the metal up. I personally don't like bleach also because I wear really nice suits when I'm pruning. But no, the best thing really is rubbing alcohol that I found for it. So right tool, sharp, clean, and I recommend using, and I left it in my box here, I didn't get it out. Just using it yesterday, I should have had it out here. The little sharpening stones. It's buried in there, I'll find it later. A lot of people want to sharpen their pruners with this. You're filing metal off. If you have to use this, tell whoever that put the smiley face, I like to call it, in the pruner blade to stop cutting metal with it. Don't prune the fence with it. Prune plants, only plants. This takes off a lot of metal. This is the more severe case. I do this maybe twice a year. The rest of the time I'm using a diamond stone, and they sell them in the pruning section, or a wet stone. And all you're doing is putting a fine, polished, I like to call it almost like the scalpel edge on it. You want these things to be super sharp. They can't be too sharp. Clean, smooth cuts heal faster, and they're less likely to get disease problems. And I always, I joke and say, you never go into the hospital and say, oh, take my appendix out. Oh, use that scalpel, the rusty one over there under the table that's got stuff all over it that's not sharp. You wouldn't want to have that happen. So clean, sharp tools. Yes, ma'am.
Instead of spraying with the alcohol, can you just wet a rag or a cotton ball or something, wipe them down? Does that work as well?
Yeah, that's what I do. This thing is actually soaked with some of the rain I was dealing with, but I just use towels like this, soak it with alcohol, and then rub it. I will squirt a little bit out of this down into the mechanism, just in case there's fungal spores or anything hanging out down there. You want to really sanitize, wipe the handles, spray the spring, everything. You really want to, Japanese maples are a very valuable plant. You really don't want to take a chance on them. One of the other things I want to mention, and it's not about pruning, is sanitation with shovels, rakes, trowels. Japanese maples, as I mentioned, are susceptible to Verticillium Wilt, which is a fungal disease that lives everywhere and nowhere in our soil. You don't know where it is unless you've got it. To prevent the disease from working its way into the plant, it generally enters through root wounds, shoot wounds, or if the tree isn't planted in a really wet location, the roots are rotting, the disease moves in. So clean your shovel. If you dig around a Japanese maple, clean your shovel with rubbing alcohol. Clean all the dirt off of it, make sure it's nice and clean, and then soak it with alcohol. I get a lot of sap on my pruners, especially if I'm doing fruit trees. So I have one of these little stainless steel brush things I got at Home Depot or whatever to scrub off the ugly, sappy stuff, and then I clean with alcohol. Again, alcohol helps break down the sap. You will get some sap from maples, but you can see this guy's been really kind of worked over. I never go into the blade. I always work away from the blade, much like sharpening a knife. You never want to introduce something into the sharp point of the blade. So sharp, clean, and the right tool. Most of my pruning is done with these Felcos. These are Felco 2s. They fit in my hand fairly well. I choke up on them though. See how I hold it? It's more comfortable for me. If it's comfortable, you're going to keep working. If it's not comfortable, you're not going to keep working. You're going to drop the thing on the ground and go watch football or go do something else, bake cookies or something in the house. So Felco makes a very wide range of pruners. I've had these for 25 years. I've thrown them in the compost bin 2 or 3 times. I found them 2 or 3 times too because they're still here. A nice leather case that keeps them handy on your belt, on your pocket. Spend the money to get good pruners. You will go through multiple pairs of poor pruners or bad pruners. The nice thing about Felcos is you can replace every single part on it. If you're strong enough to break the handle, get out of pruning and go into weightlifting. And you can replace the blade, you can replace the spring, you can replace all the mechanisms on here fairly inexpensively. So you'll buy one and then you'll keep it up with regular maintenance, but also you can replace it. If you can't replace the blade on the pruners, I don't recommend buying them. Felco makes left-handed pruners. They make pruners that have a rotating handle for people with carpal tunnel, because I pruned for 20 years. But these they don't feel comfortable to me. They also make pruners for small hands. So really Felco's done a great job. There are other brands that are good pruners. Corona's another good brand, and so on. So this is actually a bonsai tool. It's kind of an angled pruner there. You can see that allows you to get right up against the trunk. Very tight spaces with the point. Most people aren't going to need these. I brought them just to show folks if you ever see me out there pruning and you see this in my hand, you say, what is that? And this is actually a bonsai tool, and this allows you to prune very close and tight inside in these small spaces where you can't get the bigger, clunkier Felcos in there. These are not cheap either if you buy the Japanese made. It's very high-end metal. This is another bonsai tool I like using for getting in there. These real twiggy maples like this are really important, or not important, but easier to get in there and make the cuts correctly with these very fine pointed. I even recommend kitchen shears because they have enough oomph to them. They usually have a metal handle inside the plastic so you don't bend things. So the next step up, if these aren't big enough, if you're putting 2 hands on this, wrong tool. Step up. The next one is the lopper, sharp and clean. I like this one because I'm vertically challenged, and this one allows me, if I can do it, to reach. It also allows me to reach down. One of the advantages to long-handled pruners is access without having to crawl under the tree. Japanese maples have very brittle branches, especially in the time of year like right now when they're just starting to push a little bit of the spring juice. They're starting to wake up a little bit on a day like this. Unfortunately, sometimes they wake up a little bit on those sunny days and then it gets really cold. So if the lopper isn't the right one and you can't get it in there, the next step up is the hand saw. And I have Felco makes a hand saw. I very rarely ever use mine. I have found a better tool to tackle the job. There it is. They make a folding hand saw, really nice, very sharp, very sharp. Don't brush this against your hand. Locks open, and I like it because it's got this little J in it there. You can really get it's a pull saw, so you pull like this to get the cut started, then you can work it both directions. So I like this one because the rubber handle, even in wet situations, you get a good grip on it. It locks in place. It's not going to fold down on your hand. You can see what I did. Bad Joe. Joe tried to stick that in there and force it in there, and I broke the tip off. So, but I can replace the blade for a few bucks. Very common that you see that unless people are really careful with it. Silky is another brand that's a very good pruner. But my best choice for making those cuts, because I don't like to use my muscle if I don't have to, this is called a sawzall or a reciprocal saw. It's used for construction. Loud, but does the job. You can angle it. I like to call this my little saber sword. I can get in there and make the cuts I need to. I can even stick it in a long distance and make the cut if it's not too big of a cut where it's going to peel down the bark, and I'll talk about that. The blade that you want to use, they actually, now, I used to use metal cutting, like nail cutting blades, because it had a fine tooth to it and they would actually make a nice clean cut. If you use the construction grade where it's for cutting wood and nails, it's a very large tooth, it tatters the wood. You want a nice clean, like I said, a scalpel-like cut. You want the edge to be as clean as possible. This is a pruning blade that they sell now. I think this is Diablo brand, but you can get them at Home Depot, Lowe's. You can order them on Amazon. But very nice. This is actually set for pruning. This is made for pruning. They just came out with these not too long ago. They make them in longer. I think this is about the shortest one, but once again, very, very sharp. You don't want to brush this against your hand. Yes?
Will that fit other reciprocating saws?
Yeah, this is just the plain old reciprocating saw you buy for construction.
Yeah.
And I use the battery pack one.
Yeah, I have one, but I don't have that brand. So, but I can get that blade to fit.
Yeah, the blades are pretty universal.
Okay.
I think when they originally said, "Hey, let's all make different brands. Let's keep the setup the same," and that's true. And it just locks into place. But yeah, if you have a Makita or a Ryobi, they're all going to fit these same blades. I have a battery pack. I bring a charger with me. I plug it into the customers. I've got 2 batteries. They usually last quite a while, unless you're really cutting big stuff for a long period of time. Then I wear a battery out and I go pop it in the charger. So I carry a couple blades. I also have a corded one if I'm going to be in a situation where the battery pack's not going to be the best option. I'll bring a corded one. Or if I think I'm going to burn through so much, I'm going to burn through 2 batteries before I can get the first one that I burn up charged, I'll bring my corded one. It looks exactly the same, it just attaches with the extension cord. So that is sort of the basics of attacking a cut from very small to, 4, 5, 6 inch diameter, which hopefully you're not making that big of a cut. The other part of the equation, and I mentioned I am on the shorter side of things, are pole pruners. And I'm going to try not to hang this up and whack anybody with it. Let's set that one there. So, the nice thing about this one that I really like, the downside to most pole pruners with the string has a lever arm that has to move too. Well, there's very little room up in these trees to make that happen. So you end up making the wrong cut or not an adequate cut, or you just throw the thing on the ground and you go make some cookies or something. So this is a Fiskars, and this is the 9240 Fiskars. You can get it for about, I looked last night on Amazon for about 85 bucks. If you're a Prime member, you get it shipped for free, thanks to old Jeff. If you go to buy this in a garden center, are there any garland people? Don't quote me on this, but these tend to be more expensive in the garden centers. A couple $100. Support your local garden center. I highly encourage you to do that. I have 2. This is letter B. I have A and B, so I know which one I use last. I rotate them. I can identify which one's been giving me problems. I've replaced the guts in this thing. But the nice thing about this one is it's all internal. You can really get up in and around things without needing a lot of clearance. The other advantage to this, and you saw me do this, is you can angle that head. That clamshell is driven by this little bike chain, and the mechanism in there is very strong. I don't encourage this, but if you can fit it in there, you can probably cut it. Keep it good and sharp, you can probably cut it. But if you're straining to get this, I bent a pole, actually pulling so hard on it that I had it on my hip, and I was pulling and pulling, it was fully extended, and I bent the pole. So bad joke.
How far does it extend?
This extends, I think they say it's 7 feet to 14 feet And of course I need to lubricate mine. It's not wanting to do it. It goes up to 14 feet. But the nice thing is, I'm going to try not to whack anybody with it, is if you're at the very end and you're not making too big of a cut and blades or the clamshell's the adequate size, this, that's what I was afraid of. So let me take the extension off here and show you. So you can reach, if you can't even reach this, really hurt somebody today, you can pull this down and it will work as well. So you can really extend it out and make good cuts with it. So I highly recommend this if you're going to buy a pole pruner. Go ahead and get this. If you have fruit trees too, the best thing about this is if you have a fruit tree that has all the suckers on it and you want to just literally cruise across the top of that branch and cut all those suckers off. If I can get it to work for me. Angle it like that, you lock it, and then you can literally just hang this thing on that branch, pull down and cut, and you're making the correct angle. If you leave a stub, you can get sprouts. So you want to make sure that your cuts are nice and in the appropriate place. All right, enough about the big guy. This also has a saw that attaches to it, very, 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 very sharp. It just clips on the end. You rotate the head down out of the way, and then it just uses a little wing nut, little screw to attach it on the end there. The other one that I use for especially very tall maples with little tiny branches where I'm trying to get in these little fine crotches. This is an ARS extended handle pruner, and very, very sharp, very, very fine in the volume of the clipper up there. So you can really get this in. I'm not going to cut that nail because I just said don't cut nails or fence. But this allows you not only to get up, but also on those weepers to reach in and get that branch. So being only 6 foot long, this really achieves all the goals I need. They do make an extendable one. But I've never found a use for that. If I'm doing that much, I'm just stepping up to the Felco. So ARS is the brand. Long-handled pruner. This one doesn't have a number. I don't think. It's called a 6 foot extended handle pruner. This one runs around $180. They're not cheap, but you know, if you're doing it like I do professionally, the right tool for the right job is critical. So the only other tool that I recommend, or actually there's two more, is a ladder. You want to be safe. The unfortunate side to getting out and pruning in the garden is very rarely is it level. So an orchard ladder that has 2 legs with the rungs on it, and then a third leg that allows you to be on uneven locations. The other one I like, and this is one that I picked up, and I like it because it's very stable. If I can find a flat spot, I can stand on this thing, move around on it really easily. Very easy and very stable, but it also extends up to 6 feet. You just pop these out, slide it up on both sides. The other thing is this is made for in the house for, they say, for changing light bulbs on stairs or painting stairs, because you can make one side longer, the other side shorter, and you can work your way up the stairs. You can do the same thing on uneven ground. As long as you push on it, it doesn't rock, you should be safe to get up there. Safety is your priority. I can just talk about it. I don't try to say, Joe said I can dance on a ladder and fall. The other one, knee pads for the weeping maples. These are really nice. These are actually for drywalling or trim carpentry is what I used to use them for, but these are gel-filled knee pads. Nice big base to get in there. They don't strap super tight to your knees. If you don't want them to. They go on over rain pants because you're going to be pruning in the rain, most likely if you're doing it at the time of year that I do it. So that's something that is nice. The other thing I use for the weeping maples, and you get these super cheap at like Harbor Freight or Lowe's, these are just the little shop floor mats for resistance or for preventing fatigue and stress on your feet. But these are cheap. They're like $8 for a pack of 4. And I take 4 of them with me, and I'll lay it underneath the Japanese maple so I can crawl around under there, because oftentimes with a maple, I get underneath the weeping maples, I get underneath it and look up, because the sky is a wonderful silhouette to understand where the branches are going, and also if the sun is overhead, where the sun is shining down to, so you don't have overlapping branches. So, tools, we talked about that, we talked about sanitation. Now we're going to talk about a little bit about plant physiology. And this is the root. Horrible, horrible puns. This is really where you start to think about, I mentioned earlier, pruning is a cut, training is what you're doing, and this is really where you're going to think differently about what you're doing to the tree and how you're treating it. Pruning or training is not about how big the pile of branches is on the ground that you've cut off. It's about what you've left on the tree and what it's going to do with what you've left behind for it to work with. So the roots are, I like to call the roots the brain of the plant. The roots determine, based on how much surface area and uptake and moisture and nutrients it's taking up, how much it can send up to grow. That's why if you chop on a tree really hard, you see a tree that gets topped and all of a sudden it says, oh yeah, well watch this, and it explodes. That's because all you've done is made the root system mad. You've taken away the leaves and the branches, which I like to call the mouth and the stomach. It's taking in nutrients or sunlight and creating nutrients and all the micro nutrients and working with the fertilizers and things. You don't really need to fertilize maples unless you're having an issue. And use rhodiola azalea fertilizer. They like it slightly acidic, which our soil naturally is, so you don't really need to fertilize around here. The crown of the plant is a little, I call it a disc of nondescript tissue. It's undifferentiated tissue right at about soil level. That's the soul of a tree. If you come up to a apple tree and you cut it off at the ground and you walk away, you got sprouts everywhere. You've just taken the mouth and the stomach away from the brain, and it's going to make up for what you took off threefold. It's called the oh yeah, watch this. You think you're a human, I hear you roar, watch this. So if you abuse the top, the root system gets mad and comes back. Now, if you cut that apple tree down and then you have a company come in and grind the stump, you have ground the soul of that tree and it's gone. Most likely. You're going to get some root shoots on some certain types of plants. So, brain, soul, mouth, and stomach. Keep them in balance. There's a supply and demand. In the tip of the tallest bud, on this tree it is this bud right here. This has more of a hormone called auxin in it than any other bud on this tree. And in slightly degrading values. And the same here. This one has a little bit of, has a little bit in it, but less than this. The root system knows that this is there. It knows that this is there. It knows all the tips are there because there's generally a root tip that's associated with a shoot tip. And if you're a plant physiologist, raise your hand. Okay, no sleepers in the crowd. I'm explaining things in very general, sort of easier to explain. If there's a plant physiologist in here that wants to come up and whack me in the knee with a baseball bat, go right ahead. I'll get you with my pole pruner before you get there. So what I'm talking about, like I said, are very generalizations, but I'm trying to get you to understand the concept of how to work with the plant, not against it. So if I were to come in and just take this bud off, the next one in line is going to take charge. If I take that one off, the next one in line, and so on down the line. So if you come in and you take all of the tips off, the root system goes, what? I've got to make up threefold for that. So that's where you get these big, long, wispy shoots. And juvenile trees like to throw tantrums and do this wispy stuff too, and I'll talk a little bit about that more later. So the physiology of the plant, you want to work with it. Generally, you don't want to take, I like to say, more than 20% off of a maple. You've probably heard the thirds rule. That goes really for most other plants. I like to keep it to 20%. Shoot for that as the target, and that might mean you leave a lot of stuff behind because you make one big cut to alleviate one problem that's the top of the list problem. You need to come back to it next year. This pruning is not a one and done thing. It's a progression. You want to plan ahead. The cut that you're making now isn't for this year. It's actually for next year and the year after that, and really even the year after that, because you're telling it where it can grow. So giving it good guidance. is critical, and not just saying, no, you got to be smaller. That's not pruning. That's topping or chopping, I like to call it. Really, so you want to make sure that you're working with the balance of the tree. If you've got a tree that's happy and healthy, you might be able to go up to 30%, but be aware that if you take 30% off, it's going to make up. You better have really good cuts and really good direction of what you're doing with that, because it's going to make up for those cuts you made, especially if they're tips. Tips are really where a lot of the energy thought process, I like to call it. Like, plants are living, hey, little pruners. Velcro makes a pruner for those they fit in the wing. So understanding that balance and not pushing the limits, because when you start pushing the limits, you get the, oh yeah, watch this. And that's generally not a good thing. So there's a couple types of cuts we're going to talk. There's a heading cut, a thinning cut. I like to classify them as two. There's one called a selective heading cut, which is sort of come out. It used to be called a bench cut, now it's reduction cut. There's a couple different names for it. But I like to use the analogy of a highway. And these two cuts that I primarily use are going to be the two cuts that you use. On maples. And one of the most important things to understand about maples is the bud pattern. This is true for all trees. So on maples, the bud pattern is opposite. There's one on each side of the branch, right at the same place. And then they're in an alternate pattern, north-south, east-west, north-south, east-west, all the way down the tree. So that's what you get to play with. That's what you get to work with. So, knowing that physiology, you get to tell it where to grow. You can tell it to grow east or west or north or south or whichever pattern you cut above. And that's also true, you know, the buds are dormant in here in a similar pattern. And I'll kind of do this. The other one's hidden back there. So the two types of cuts, a heading cut. And like I said, I use the analogy of a highway. A heading cut means you're driving down the highway and somebody came in and they cut the road off. You cut the head off. The tree has to build off-ramps now. And building off-ramps takes energy, and it's a little bit more reactive than a thinning cut. So by making that cut, you send a message to the root system, you got to wake up these dormant buds, and wherever you cut, the next set of 3 down the line will break and go. Okay? You're going to use maybe 20% of those ever. Now this is on maples. Different situation for different trees. Now like fruit trees, their buds are whirled down the stem. So start paying attention to the bud direction, because what you leave behind in bud direction means it's going to go that way. Roses, if you prune roses, you've used bud direction by following the little pink bud on that side of the green stem and the rose grows that way. You're doing the same thing, you just do it in pairs on maples. A thinning cut means I'm going to come in and I'm going to take this one off at its point of origin, and I'm going to take this one off at its point of origin. I've made the same volume of material taken off, but I left the tip alone, and a couple tips I've left alone, but I haven't shocked the tree by taking the tip bud away, and it doesn't have to build new off-ramps. It's already got off-ramps. So a heading cut, highway gets cut off, road construction crews got to come in and build off-ramps. A lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of energy going into that. Can be a little confusing if you do too many of those. A thinning cut just means you've made a cut you cut off an off-ramp, or let me draw this back the way it was, like this. So you've got your original branch here. A thinning cut would be coming back and taking it off here, and you're leaving existing off-ramps. So the energy doesn't have to go into building, it just goes into extending the direction of the off-ramps that are already there. Does that make sense? 70 to 75% of your cuts are going to be thinning cuts. The other cut that I listed on the paperwork here is a selective heading cut or reduction cut. And what that one is, it used to be called a type of thinning cut, or what was referred to as a bench cut, which would mean you're going to come in. I'm going to stop using my finger here on my eraser. That cut, that reduction cut, would be you're coming in and you're just taking off the tall part and you're leaving the next two. It's a type of thinning cut. I'll just keep it simple and say there's two types of cuts. Thinning, you already have existing off-ramps. Heading cut, you've got to build new off-ramps. You could be very dramatic and make a reduction cut all the way down to that. And then now this is, you've left the west and you've taken off the east and you've taken off everything above that. That's that reduction cut is what it's called. You've reduced the size, but you still got an off-ramp. Thinning would be also coming in and selecting out like this. You're thinning the branch. Does everybody understand that? All right. I'm trying to work through the physiology fast so we can get to the important parts. So one thing about plant physiology and when you make your cuts is everywhere there's a bud or a branch, inside the trunk, there's a little trap door in there. So if I make a cut here, then the plant's going to go, okay, that tissue's been cut. I'm going to close this trap door and let these two then be the new leaders. I'm going to close that off and seal it off with some wax to prevent pest or disease from coming in. The same thing goes with, if it's just buds, there's a little trap door in there. If I cut here, that trap door is going to close. Then the energy is used to break off and make new off-ramps. Everybody get that? So there's a trap door in there. It's also like on cherry trees, you see whole branches dying back. And that's because bacterial canker and chemosis, the plant goes, oh, it's coming down the line. I better cut this branch off, and it will actually do some natural thinning on its own. If you see a whole branch die back on a maple, unfortunately, that's often signs of Verticillium Wilt, and that is the disease working its way back into the tissue until the plant can finally slam a trap door shut far enough back to where it doesn't get into the trunk and into the soul and crown and kill the tree. So, clean pruners, clean pruners, clean pruners. I can't say it enough. When you make a cut, I like to leave about a 1/16 to a 1/4 of an inch. Now, if you're looking at a branch, there's a bud on it. So this could be a bud or a branch, like this. So if you look at a tree, and maple's really easy to see. See these lines that go around it? Those are, I like to say, those are sort of the trapdoor locations. So there's what's called the branch bark ridge, which is the little wrinkled tissue that's above, and then the collar is all part of this. So you see this shield shape. That is the trapdoor for this branch. And you never want to cut into the tissue of that. So I usually leave a little stub. You don't want to cut perfectly flush. Looking at it from the side, it would look like this. And there's always a little wrinkled ridge up here, and that's called the branch bark ridge. On heavy branches, there's a distinct cut pattern that I'll show you. So this is the little shield shaped thing here. If I come in and make a nice clean cut, I'm outside of that wrinkled area. Actually, I just showed you what I should do. So you come out, you leave just a tiny little bit of tissue outside that wrinkled area. You're leaving room for the tree to close, time for the tree to close that trap door. Yes, sir?
Could you kind of repeat some of that by standing to the left of it?
Sure. Yeah, sorry. I know it's a tough one. Sorry about that. So on the trunk here, you've got a branch coming out, or even if it's just a dormant bud, there's a little ridge that runs over. It's easier to see. The bigger the branch, the easier it is to see. And you can really see it on maples because it looks like a pair of lips kind of kissing. you can see it on every single union there. And that, like I said, that's sort of the trapdoor tissue. And you don't want to gouge into it because then you poked a hole in the trapdoor. It's better to leave a little stub and come back later if it's too long. And I never recommend going more than 1/4 of an inch and never less than about 1/16 of an inch. The bigger the branch, I tend to leave a bigger stub because that gives the tree time to close that big trapdoor. If it's a little branch, clip it, it seals it, wound's healed, it's fine. Bigger branch, that tree needs a little time to do that. So I leave maybe 1/4 of an inch, at the most 1/2 an inch, but I know I'm going to come back and nip that 1/2 inch off or even that 1/4 inch off the next year after that trapdoor is closed, and you'll see it's a little wobbly. So if I cut it like that, I probably don't need to come back and do anything with that wound if I just leave a 1/16. What you want to make sure is don't cut too close. You can always come back and cut it off later. You can't put it back on. That's a hard, fast rule of pruning is you can never put it back on. You can try, but then you're a grafter and you got a different profession ahead of you. So does that make sense? Did that get you some of the info there? So if I were to leave a bigger stub, because it's a bigger branch, then next year I would come back in with my saw and take it off to an acceptable amount. Yes?
How would you know if it's too big or too small? Like, I'm sure the tree will give you some sort of reaction to it, right?
Right. So the reason you don't want to leave it too big is when you make that cut, we've all seen the knot hole in the tree where the edges of the wound roll over, and you want to see a fully round roll. You don't want the donut to be broken. So if the tree has to roll around a 1/16 of an inch, it doesn't have to extend its lips out to cover it.
Got it.
If you do a 1/16 of an inch, it can just kind of go, oh, and roll and close. Much less work for the tree to envelop because it's going to roll it, and if it keeps hitting something, it's going to take her longer for that roll to get to the end of what you left behind and close it off, because that's the goal, is to close it off, shut it down, prevent pest or disease. Yes?
Sometimes it's not clear to me because the bottom of that branch that I cut, it seems to extend. I can't see where the bottom, what the angle should be.
Right.
Exactly. I can't see where the bottom.
Yeah. So I believe what you're referring to is the angle of the cut that you want to make on the branch. And I'll try to be...
So I end up with a broken donut because the bottom
Right.
wasn't right.
So this is that little ring that I talked about that goes around the thing. This is that little puckered ridge. What you want to do is, it's best to be a little bit fat on the bottom. 16th up here, 8th there.
Sometimes it slopes in, and I don't see a real demarcation.
Right. Where that branch attaches is what you want to not exceed.
Okay.
Where if you were to follow that linear, you know, you can look it up online. They talk about angle and it's really on different plants. Maples are nice because they angle at about 45 degrees, so
Okay.
it's really fairly easy to see. But you want to try to make this a vertical or a parallel cut to the trunk. If you're parallel, and as long as you're outside of those kissing lips at the top,
Okay.
then you're probably clear on the bottom.
Thank
It's
you.
always better, instead of cutting, as tight as possible, come out a little bit and angle away, because those branches come up like this, so it's better if you kind of work with that angle. And what you're trying to do is essentially be not quite perpendicular to this, because then that might send you leaving a really fat bottom. So I like to say parallel with the trunk with a little bit of room keeps you away from that. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
Great question, though. And you can go online, and I've got some references at the bottom of my paperwork there, some resources to look some more of this stuff up. So knowing about the branch bark, the collar and the branch bark ridge, knowing that's the trapdoor, you don't want to eat into that. It's critical for the plant to be able to shut that tissue down and prevent pest or disease from coming in. So the dormant buds, as I mentioned, if this weren't a branch, if this were a dormant bud, it's still there. So if you made a cut here, that's going to break and go. You just wouldn't want to cut too far down into those kissing lips. Like I said, we've all seen that really nice roll, donut-shaped roll. Really, that's what you want to see. But you don't want to have the lips extend out and French kiss that. I don't know what else to say. French kiss the stub you left behind. No French kissing stubs. That's the first time I've ever said that in a brief. I said it a little bit. Okay, so like I said, about 1/4 inch or less, then you can remove next year if you come back in and you see that it's closed the door and that little bit of tissue that you left behind is now brown or gray. You can snip it off and make it look a little cleaner. Sometimes I will leave like I said, on bigger branches, sometimes, or if I'm questioning whether the tissue has any issues of like potential disease or anything, sometimes I'll snip and leave a stub, knowing I'm going to come back next year and just grab that one as part of the rest of my pruning. One thing about big branches is if you have a major branch to take off, and there's your kissing lips and there's your shield. If you have a large branch to take off, you want to use the 3-cut principle. The first cut you want to make is out away from the trunk 2 or 3 inches. And let's say this thing's 12 feet long and it's extending up. You want to make an up cut about 1/3 to half the way into the trunk from the underneath side. Your next cut will be from the top, just outside of that cut. And what that will do is, we've all seen where branches, if you cut too close and you don't make a clean cut, it peels down the bark. That's what you're preventing with this cut. So that, having this cut and then the second cut just slightly out from it, before you even make this cut, the weight of that thing is going to snap off and you're going to have this tattered little cut here. Then you come back in with your nice clean saw because you don't have the weight of the branch to deal with potentially. If you were just to come in and start cutting like this, cutting, when it gets to here, the weight of this thing is going to pull down, the whole branch is going to break and you're going to peel the bark down that trunk. You don't want to do that because there's no trap door here, there's one down here, and then pretty much that could just be toast and you've got to start over. So on heavy weighted branches, 3 cuts. Up cut, slightly outside of that, a top cut, the branch will break off, then you come back and you make your precise cut in order to remove that branch. Once again, if I'm cutting a 2-inch branch, I'll try to leave about 1/8 of an inch, but not more. Unless I have some issues with, I'm worried about disease or something, I might leave a little bit more. But really, you want to try to make 1 cut if you can. But if you're not sure, you can always make a cut the next year once that trap door is closed. So, everybody got that concept on the branch bark ridge, that trap door? I've tried many different ways to figure out how to explain these things. Yes?
If you have a large branch that breaks and you cut it, do you recommend using sealer?
I don't use sealer. Mother Nature does a much better job than we do of healing wounds. Now, by putting something topical over it, and everybody has their, I'm not saying the people that recommend that are wrong. That is totally their choice, and it's probably worked for them for many years. They wouldn't do it if they didn't. I like to let Mother Nature heal the wounds the way she's going to do it. So I don't put anything on the wounds, because what you can do is if you make a cut, and then you go, you grab your coffee, you take a sip, you come back, well, there's fungal spores floating around in there everywhere, all the time. One of them could land on there, and then you come and you put a roof over its head and a buffet at its feet. And you can't see the damage that's happening because it's covered up with tar or some type of waxy substance. There's beeswax, there's tars, there's variable products that do that. And for my bonsai trees, I do it because it's a look that I'm going for, not necessarily a physiological reason. It's more of a look thing that I like. So I don't recommend wound treatments. If a car hits a tree, you want to, I like to say, take off all the tatters, clean it up with a razor knife, works really well, clean wounds, but don't, they used to say cut back into live green cambium. So the cambium is the generative tissue, and that's the green stuff. If I scratch this bark, the green stuff that's in there, that's called the cambium. That's the generative tissue. It's a single layer of cells that's throwing out bark, and it's throwing out xylem and phloem tissue to the inside, or food and water uptake tissue to the inside. That is what does the role. The cambium is that technical term for that tissue. Okay, so one thing you can do, a lot of times you'll get, if it's a maple that's been grafted, and weeping maples are all grafted. We'll start with the weeper today, because that's probably most everybody's questions is the weepers, right? Show of hands for the weepers. They're the most challenging, or one of the most challenging. But we're going to arm you today with the goods to get it done. So, this is 2 trees. You've got your weeping, desirable variety on top. Does this help if I step off to this side here? So you've got the weeping variety. Weeping trees don't exist in nature. You can't walk through the hills of Japan and find one of these. They are a product of a mutation off of an upright that was then cultivated. Because it's a mutation, it might not have a good, hardy, sturdy root system, much like fruit trees are grafted. That's so you get the best of both worlds. You get the disease-resistant, pest-resistant, predictable rootstock. You get the desirable color or pattern of leaf or shoot stock. And they marry them together when they're young. They grow together and they form a nice union, and they keep on growing. So and you can see it because the bark's actually a different color. And on some weeping ones that have a straight trunk and then the umbrella starts up here, there's 3. There's a root graft, because they put these on straight Acer palmatum rootstock, which is more pest and disease resistant. Then they marry the straight lollipop stick trunk. And then they marry on top of that the weeping part. One thing that I'll mention is this branch is 2 feet off the ground, roughly. In 100 years, it's still going to be 2 feet off the ground. The trunk does not extend up. This canopy doesn't push up. The tip grows up and keeps making canopy. So if you carve your name in a tree at 3 feet and you come back, don't carve your name in trees, especially beech trees, which people love to do. If you were to carve your name in a tree and you come back 50 years later, much like me in 50 years maybe, I'm still at the same height, but I've gotten a little wider. So just know that if you go, oh, well, that branch is hanging low, oh, in 10 years it'll be up here. No, it won't. It's going to be out here. But it's also going to be bigger around. So it's actually going to be a little closer to the ground. So keep that in mind. So understanding the physiology is critical. Now that we've talked about grass, and I talked about the north, south, east, west of branching, when to prune, you want to do them, I prefer to do the first time I meet a tree, or I tell people that plants are like children. They all have attitudes, and I have a 2-year-old. They all have their energy, and they all have their own personality. You could have 2 maple trees 3 feet apart. Not you want to do that, I'm exaggerating, but you could have them 3 feet apart, and one grows same exact variety, you bought them at the same time, they're in the same size pot, everything. One grows a foot a year and the other grows 6 inches a year. Treat each plant like an individual. Follow the predictable patterns of pruning, but then also start to pay attention to how each one reacts. One in the front yard might react a certain way, different than one in the backyard. Same exact plant, everything's the same. But you don't know what's in the micronutrients, you don't know the microbial organisms that are involved in that tree. The ecosystem that's in the soil is the whole reason why this thing is even existing. Soil is critical. Good soil. You don't want to plant your maple trees in soggy, wet soil. They don't like that. Build the mound up. Don't dig a hole. Throw that soil away because you got clay, and put what you perceive as good soil in the hole, because then all you've done is create a bathtub, clay bathtub with no drain hole. Build up. Pitcher's mound. Mound them up. Get them up out of the water. Don't ever throw your soil away in. Mix in other things to make it better. Some people follow the philosophy of Don't ever do anything to your native soil, plant the tree right in it, level, all that. Everybody has their way of doing it. My success over many years has been planting on pitcher's mound because they're always going to settle a little bit. Don't make it, I like to call it Mount Mapleus. Don't make it like this. Make it a nice rounded pitcher's mound. 4 or 5 feet wide, 6 inches tall. If you need to go up, I have a peach tree right now that's sitting 18 inches above my wet, heavy clay soil, and the pitcher's mound is 6.5 feet wide. And that's because if I don't do that, that peach tree is going to be sitting in water, and it won't be happy. So, prune in the wintertime, the plant's asleep. It's going to wake up and go, okay, those things have been done to me. The energy is going to come back up. It's going to push the growth. There is also summer pruning, June, July. If I have met a tree for a year or two and I pruned it and I get to know its energy reaction, I like to call them whether it's going to throw a tantrum or not, I can pretty much walk up to that tree any time of year once I've gotten to know its energy, its attitude, and prune it any time of year. But really, ideally, you don't want to prune as the leaves are unfurling. You really want to prune before the leaves, before you see a full open leaf. Anytime before that. I've even pruned them when they're just starting to break. I've pruned, I can't lie and say I haven't pruned when the first leaves unfurl, but I knew the tree and I knew what I was doing to it. First time, I always recommend doing it in the dormant season. Summertime is a good time for thinning, especially the weepers, but prune it first in the winter. Learn that tree, watch it wake up, see what it's going to do. The June, July pruning is a thinning, and it's really good for the weepers. The uprights you can do in the winter. Yes.
So what do you consider months of winter here? Are you like from
Yes.
December to January, or?
Every year it's different, and that's changing.
Okay.
You want to prune once the leaves turn in the fall and start to drop off, you can start pruning. All the way up until the leaves start to break out and you start to really see, okay, there's a leaf. I say cut it off then. If you're really pruning, if you're really going at it and doing a 30% really big clean out, do it when it's fully dormant. Don't let it start to even swell buds. So it's hard to say exactly. One of the things you don't want to do is make a cut on a nice sunny day like we had last week, and then the nighttime temperatures are well below freezing. When you make a cut, there's exposed tissue that has moisture associated with it, and that moisture extends all the way back down the vascular tissue. These are all straws. If you make a cut and then it freezes that night, those frost crystals will travel down that cut. And you thought, well, if I'm going to cut this off and do a thinning cut here, well, if that frost then travels down the stem to here, this whole section is going to die off. So now you're back here, not where you had planned. So no freezing temperatures, no below freezing within 24 hours, really 48 hours if you can do it, but in our climate it's hard for me. I'm pruning out every day, or almost every day. It's hard for me to not do it with a 24-hour or 48-hour period. 24 hours should be enough. If it's a big branch, bigger than an inch diameter, give it 48 hours, because that bigger wound's going to take longer for that plant to seal that wound off. It secretes a little wax. The moisture falls away from the cut, and the plant starts to secrete some wax. So, once again, don't do more than 20%. We get to start pruning. All right. Is everybody comfortable on the physiology and understand you got to work with it? The I am human, hear me roar attitude is not a good one to have with plants. They have been here longer than we have, and they're going to be around longer than we have. So, let's get to it. So, on weeping maples, there's a couple of different types. As I mentioned, this is grafted, and this canopy starts weeping here at 2 feet, then there's another tier at 3 feet, another one at 4 feet. This tree, if not for the grower when it was young, to stick a piece of bamboo right down here and take this piece off to it, would just be a low mushroom. So this is what's called uprighting a weeper. So you get it up off the ground. If you were to plant this tree and it was just this mushroom, it's just going to be a little bigger, a little bigger, and a little bigger every year. So if you want your maple tree to be taller, bless you, and to have what I call like a wedding tier, small canopy, bigger, bigger, so that wedding tier effect. And you'll see it out there in the weepers. Growers do this to give you a different visual effect. So this thing was put up a piece of bamboo, and then before the grower sent it here, they clipped it off, or out in the field when they got it to their desired height, they clipped it off. From now on, this thing is only going to go down unless I leave an up for it to go up, and then a north-south breaks off of that, and a north-east-west breaks off of north-south. So it will stair-step its way up naturally, but it's not going to grow straight up like this. This is man-made straight upness. But you can do that, and that's one of the things that I recommend doing when the plant is put 3 feet from the corner of the sidewalk in the driveway. It's going to grow. It needs leaf surface area. It's got to have that surface area to support its root system. If you don't give it to it, you started a battle that you're probably not going to win. If you do win, your tree's probably not that pretty because of how much you're really taking off. And maple trees, I said, have a nice sort of 45-degree angle. In that branch bark collar that we talked about over there, there's thousands of little dormant buds. It doesn't need them right now. But if that branch breaks off, you see sprouts come out from where a broken branch is. That's one of those dormant buds waking up and going, okay, there's sunlight there, I'm going to go get it. Because they will reach into the sun. That's the goal for them. That's their energy. So if you have a weeper that's too close to the sideway in the drive walk, and you can take a branch and start, you can always do this. I've done it on maples this big that have been pruned at 6 feet. They should be 12 feet, but they've been whacked and sheared into 6 foot. I take one and I go up, or I even take one and just put a little brace under it to send it up. It wants to go up. That's more sunlight. Naturally, it's going to want to go up. So if I were to want to continue uprighting this maple, I would straighten this out. And if you can't go this way, but you can let it go this way, the tree's happy. So let's get to the weeper. So one of the first things that you want to do is take out dead or diseased wood. And if you see diseased wood, the stem is black, it's got scars or pits or cankers or splits in the bark, you want to take those off. I usually take all the dead or diseased wood off first, and then I clean my pruners. If you know you're pruning a diseased tree, cut, clean, cut, clean, cut, clean. Clean, clean, clean. I can't express sanitation enough. So, the first thing you want to do is come in and be honest with yourself. Maples have these little white stems. They break off. See that? You know, these little, you see them on the tips. And that's the plant. It's already closed that trap door. It's fine. You can often break them off. Sometimes you got to cut them off. I don't see any on here that I need to cut. Here's a long stub. Look at this stub. Can everybody see that? That's no good. Those lips aren't going to reach that far. That's rest in peace, Hot Lips Houlihan. Reference there, all right. And that's not the fault of the person that came through and cut and made this and this happen. That's why this fork is here, and that's why this one is here. And then they came in and took off the south and left the north, which is good. So they were just going through. A lot of times these are pruned quickly when they're young. You see a lot of heading cut, or these are thinning cuts. That's kind of that reduction cut that I talked about, and they're sending it east and west there. So one of the things you want to first do is come in and what you want to do is clean the slate. Be honest with yourself about what you're looking at. I'm going to take all the dead little twigs off, and a lot of times they just break off. One of the most important things with weeping maples, and it doesn't get done often or soon enough, is in the fall, after all the leaves have fallen off, they get caught up in the tree. You got to rake those out. That will create big problems. So, after you remove the dead or diseased tissue and you clean, what you want to do then is start looking at the architecture of the tree. You've got parallel branches here. Can you see these two? Something's got to go. So I want to go, okay, pros column, cons column, and literally take a piece of paper out there. Yes, sir.
Can you set that up on the table?
Sure. Yeah. Hope the table holds. It's not too wet. Does that help? So, can everybody see these two parallel branches? They're running into each other. So crossing branches is a health issue. You don't want crossing branches. They rub, they make a scar, they let disease and pest in. So, I need to take one of those off. Well, let's start with the one here. It's growing in a congested area right in there. So that's a con. It's not a nice clean branch from a clean area. It's congested in there. The one down here, less congested. It comes, the first one comes out and just dives down. It's got a little side shoot going that way. It's not touching the ground, which some people say don't let the maples touch the ground. The fear is that a bug might crawl up it. Well, all they have to do is walk 3 feet more and get on the trunk and go up. So, not to say that some people like the cousin it look all the way to the ground. Other people like the wedding cake layered look. Both are great. They both work. It just depends on what you want. So, I have to take one of these off. The congested branch attachment point is a big no. That's a big con. It doesn't have a lot of forking too much. This one comes out, it has a nice fork, it's got a nice north that's going in a positive direction, coming out. These are going, okay, I've made my decision. I'm going to cut off the one that's just diving down. And leave a little stub in there. So I've cleaned that up. Here's another situation. This is a north and a south. You see that? They're growing over the top. What you want to try to do is give each branch its own patch of sunlight. If you were able to look straight over the top, and that's why I like laying underneath them. People think I'm taking naps under the maple because I lay my mats down. All they see is my feet. But if you hear me snoring, then that means I am sleeping or studying the maple. So I prefer to encourage the one that's growing out. It does dive down, but I've got a couple side shoots that I can cut it back to. So that one I want to take off the south. Over here, and I'm going to take more than 20% off this tree because of the example. So do as I say, not as I do. So here's a situation. This is kind of a crazy conglomerate of branches. This little one here is emanating from the crotch. I don't want that. That's a bad one right off the bat. So I'm going to go in and take that off. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm pro and conning and cleaning out. The cons get cleaned out and the pros stay. And you could leave a branch on and cut it next year. You can always take it off. So this congestion here, here's a branch here that's got a nice, really nice pattern to it. There's a few dead little stems on it here. So by taking the dead stuff off, you're being honest with what palette you have to work with, what your canvas is. This one that comes off has a fork, a pitchfork, which I'm not a big fan of the pitchforks. I'm going to try to not flip people off. I try to take the middle one out. You know, if it's like this, I try to leave that. I can't do my fingers like that. So the one in the middle should probably come out. This one's hanging down. It's going to be on the ground. But I do have a nice one to grow out there. I knew this was going to come off regardless of which one I keep. You can select back and then end up making the big cut later. So this one is now a positive because it's not hitting the ground. It's going out. This one comes out. And then that one goes over. This is sort of a south that then bounces back up. I'm going to take that off. Now, between these two, this one has more potential. It's got more branching on it. It's got more potential. So I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, this is kind of a weird union here. This angle is kind of a weird elbow. So I'm actually, because of this weird union, it's a bud behind a cut. It was made years ago. It grew kind of down in an elbow. It's not a nice 45. It kind of curves around. It makes a weird angle there. So that one really should come off regardless. So I'm still deciding between these two. This one is higher. The branches are elevated more. This one kind of dives down. That one goes up. And pulling them out of the way helps kind of evaluate what you're doing. Also, you can grab a branch and kind of tap it and wiggle it and see where it goes. I'm actually going to make a big cut right here. So you see how I eliminated that clutter? All right. Same thing here. This is just kind of this crazy conglomerate of branches that happened because somebody made a cut They made two cuts right next to each other, and there's a pitchfork in here. It's really kind of ugly. So the branch that makes these two stems up, it's really hard. It's difficult to do this from a distance. It's really easier standing in front of a tree side by side. This one dives down. It's coming out of a conglomerate that I don't care for because it's just a weird angle. I'm going to go in and take that one out. I freed up a lot of space there. This one here is straight, and it's shooting straight up. You don't want straight ups in a weeper. This one's kind of diving down. This one's got a bad, it got cut, but the side branches didn't form. So I'm going to go back to an off ramp that's going in a positive direction. This area is just kind of cluttered, so I just want to thin it out a little bit. This one's just kind of a stub. See, it doesn't have a lot to work with on it. There's really not much. And so that's a negative because this one above it, really nice side branching and things. So I'm going to actually come in and take that off. So I've really thinned out that. See that ugly curve there? That's not a good thing. This branch has side branches that will come over and fill this space over time. I do have an up here, a north, that's happened, but that's just really, it doesn't look aesthetically pleasing, so I'm going to take that off. This one's got a crossing branch here, so I'm going to take the crossing branch off. There. And this little twiggy thing in here is coming off of the trunk, and it's just coming into the clutter. You want to reduce the clutter and leave good bones behind. So I tend to come in and sort of take off the south, leave the north, because that on a weeper is what you're looking for. So, oh, that's a broken branch. So, a little stub there. So you see now we freed that up. There's a nice canopy. Essentially, I'm going to try to get the other stuff out of the way. See that nice layer I've left behind there? It's an arm that's got room to grow. It's got its own space to grow in. There's this little one growing off the trunk here right above it. Once again, you don't want them right above each other necessarily because you want to get open layers in there. That's how that wedding cake layer or look comes about. This one, look at that. See how it's wrapped around that other branch?
Yeah.
Don't like it. So I'm going to follow it back to its point of origin. There's a side branch near there. Actually, I'm going to follow it back and see if there's any off-ramps I like. There just really isn't. And it's colliding with this one, which has a good pattern to it. It is kind of diving back, which I don't like. So I'm going to eliminate this twisty. Sometimes you got to free them up, see where they're going. It's not quite so twisted now. It's actually in its own open space. So I'm going to take it off there. You want to free up the branches. That's another thing. Not only do you want to get the wood out there, somebody walked by mowing and hooked it around the other branch. That, could be what happened here. So this one comes down and dives down. So really from this point down, it's a con. It's not a pro. So I'm going to come back in and take it off there. So that canopy is going to fill out that way. We want to just imagine if they continue to grow, what they're going to do. You want sort of fan patterns spreading out, not cluttering each other. So here is, I'm trying to give everybody a view here. Sorry, give these folks a view. So this branch comes and dives down, and it's pretty much going straight down. It's competing for space with this one, which is also diving down and kind of curving back a little bit. But this one's growing off the bottom. This is a south. This is a west. So I'm going to take the south off and leave the west. There's a lot of little stubs here I'm just going to take off to clear off the trunk a little bit. One thing you don't want to do is take all the side branches off and leave a puff at the end. It's called tiger tailing or octopusing. You don't want to do that. You want to leave side branches I usually say sort of in an alternate pattern. Whichever the side branches that look good, you don't want to prune them all off of one side and leave all the others, because then it's lopsided. So you want a nice, fractal is a common term that's used for the patterns that you leave behind with the side branching. So here's one. This cut was made, it spurred this growth, but it's got all these little stubby, not really good direction going. So I'm going to take that off. I'm going to do a thinning cut back to that. And look at that. That one's going to grow up and curve down. So I've opened that area up. With weeping maples, you cannot eliminate crossing branches. There's just no way to do it. They're inherently a crossing branched tree. There's little stubs on the bottom here. I'm just cleaning off. This one has a west. I'm going to actually make it branch at another west so I get more of a fan at the end. Instead of two long shoots, I trimmed this one back to an east and a west. So I have a longer one with a side shoot that's going to fork. So I'm creating that fan pattern. Here's the situation. This one comes out and dies. Any of these would be good candidates to prune beyond, but I kind of like this flow that this one has here. So I'm going to take it back to here. And I'm going to do a little thinning. Can everybody see these three parallels? I want to thin that down a little bit. I'm going to take that one out so I create a nice open layer there. This one's coming out this way. So these two are competing for now. I'm going to leave them. I can take whichever one starts to perform the best. So you generally want your longest branches at the bottom, tearing back up to the center. This little twig here is growing and wrapping around. It's not freed up, and it's got a really kind of an odd branch attack, angle of attack there. This is where these come in for me, is being able to, here, I'm trying not to block everybody's view. See, that allows me to get into there and get that cleared out. This one has one that's coming up and crossing over. I'm going to clean it out. So I'm going to start making cuts here. What I'm going to refer to them as with one word, thinning or removal, essentially clutter. This is just an errant branch at the bottom. You can actually rub those off if you want. See, this one here is coming out. It's going in a nice pattern. This one's going straight up. The straight up looks weird. This one goes straight up and curls back, so I'm going to take that off. This one's growing up and crashing into this one, so I'm going to take it off. Everybody see that? This is kind of cluttered. This one is growing up and crashing into here. This one comes out of the side and crashes into there. This is the thinning cut. Now some of these ones that are going up will bend back down. So if you don't have to take it off, don't. You can take it off next year. Here's a situation where this branch is coming down. There's a nice fork here. It's kind of a north-south that sort of split and went its own way. I've got one on the east, I've got one on the west, and I've got one down in south. I'm just going to thin that one up like that. So you see that nice branching pattern, the really nice staggering of the branches. This one is growing from in the crotch of this bigger branch union, so I want to take that off. That one is kind of crashing down onto this layer, and that's that kind of curly cue that we established earlier. And I bumped into this, like I said, they're delicate. I bumped into that and broke it. So I'm going to go back and make a heading cut at an east and a west. If I send it north and south, I'm crashing one into the ground and I'm sending one up. Up might be the option on an upright maple that's growing out over the sidewalk. People tend to just cut it right at the edge of the sidewalk. Follow it back to a point where you have a north and a south. Cut it at that. Encourage the north, cut the south off, and you sent it up over your head. So take the north road up and over your head. Yes?
In that situation, which I have over a sidewalk, is it better to do that in the June, July time frame?
I would do it all first in the winter.
Okay.
Yep.
You're not spurring new growth, it's just gonna make it worse.
What you're doing is you're spurring growth, but you know the direction it's going to grow based on the buds and the branches you left behind.
Okay.
So, like I said, unfortunately, those tightly placed maples are challenging. Look at going up. You know,
Got a dogwood over it.
Maybe the dogwood needs a lift. No. So those are the challenges. So you're going to be in what I'll call a progression. You're going to take it back to a suitable bud. You're going to let it express. You're going to do a heading cut, make it grow new forks. And then when those forks get too long, you can take those back to another fork that's acceptable. So you're leaving behind positive direction. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm still not, this guy just keeps grabbing me and bothering me here, and I'm not sure. What I'm going to do is it's crashing down here, but if I take it off here, I actually send it east and west to grow out over this. This one's longer, that's good. This one is just crossing and crashing in. Take that off. This one's just kind of twiggy growth in the middle, clogging it up. See this conglomerate of branches here? There's 3 of them grown together. I want to free them up first. This one, the con is that it's growing from the lips of a branch union between these two, so that's a negative. Any branch growing out of the branch bark collar is a bad thing, especially if it's really tiny and skinny like this, and it's growing out of a bigger diameter branch. So I'm going to take that off. Now you start to see, if you look into the silhouette, each thing, there's a few little crossing, and that's okay. Like I said, with the weepers, you're never going to be able to eliminate the crossing. I call them wonky branches. The branch that's like, everything's going this way, and there's the one guy that likes to go like that. So, see that? Everything's kind of pluming up and out. I'm actually going to take this one back to here. One more up. After you start working, you're going to come back and reevaluate some things. So now that plume is growing, that's crashing there. So, well, maybe I take it a little bit further back. I'm going to take it off there and there. Now I have this really nice balance of east and west and north and south, and it's not crashing. And it's going to continue this way. I could go all the way back here if I wanted to tear this up a little bit more. Something like that. You see that separation I've created between those layers now? Now, with the summer pruning, that's when you're going to separate your layers. You can see where the leaves are, follow the branch back in, wiggle it, literally hold them next to each other to compare what they're doing and wanting to do to create that open space. You could even come all the way back up to here if you wanted and send it out this way. You're telling it where to grow based on the heading cut with the fork, the buds side by side that you leave to make a fork, or a thinning cut, which is just where they you're leaving an off ramp, which is what I've done with most of these cuts. I'm going to leave a few of these little white stubs on here so people can see what I'm talking about that needs to come off. And that was a cut that was made, and literally you can just break. I'm not going to do it because I want you to see it. You've seen them probably, but you can break them with your thumb really easily. So the last thing I'm going to work on is the top of this tree. You want to work from the bottom up, because if I've taken my 20% off the bottom, I don't get to touch the top this year. This guy's or this one's a different story. So we've got this curve, this the wedding tree, or the weeping maples have kind of this wedding cake sort of flow to them. I call them whoop-de-doos. If you want to encourage whoop-de-doos, this one's got a straight up shot. I'm going to take that one off. I'll leave this one because it might come up and make a nice canopy layer there at some time. I don't have to take it off. I'm not going to. So I'm going to dress this here. This one here is coming off of the south. This is its north companion. The north is fine. The south comes out, wraps around, crashes into this west. So I'm going to take it off. It's really hard to do with trying not to break things. See those 3 branches that are all following the same pattern? It's the pitch. It's not quite the pitchfork. It's really just the 3 bears there. I'm going to take the one in the middle out. Same thing here. Got these 3. I'm going to take the one in the middle out. Those are all going in positive directions. This one here, this is an east. I cut, I left it, but it's actually coming straight back through. It's running parallel to the main trunk. So this one right here is my main flow. This one comes out and wraps back into it. So there, everything's got its own space. It's going in a positive direction. This one is just, this little one here is just going to mirror right underneath this one, so I'm going to take it off, but I'm going to leave the one that's going that way on. So, anybody have any questions?
What about the length of those three on my right?
These?
Yeah.
Okay, let me put it back up here. So, if it's not impeding onto a sidewalk, not a problem. You don't necessarily want to take the tip off unless it's got a goal. And that's one thing I mentioned it in here is what's the goal of your pruning? What do you hope to achieve? And once again, it can't be to make it smaller. To get it off the sidewalk, if you prune it on the sidewalk side, prune it less on the other three sides.
What about when you plant it? Those are almost going to be touching the ground. That's okay.
Yeah, I don't feel that touching the ground. It's the look. If you are you a peas and carrots can't touch the mashed potatoes type of person, or are you slurry it all together and slop it down with a fork and a spoon? Exactly. It's what you like. I have a customer up in Seattle. The husband likes the cousin it full. Can't see a branch inside it all the way to the ground. Touches, makes a skirt along the ground. The wife doesn't like that. She likes the wedding cake layered look. Well, she sits at the coffee table or the kitchen table, looks out the back window. She gets the weeping maple in the back. He sits in the garage and watches the neighbors. He gets the maple in the front, cousin it. It's really what you want. But to address this branch, if I were to cut this off, this north-south, one of the south is diving back in. That's a con. This east here is coming out this way. That's acceptable, but I do have another branch over here. This north here is actually going in a positive direction. Sorry, I'm putting you right behind the post there. Can you see that?
Uh-huh.
So this is a no-no. That's bad. I mean, I'll just eliminate progression prune it. That's okay. There's a little stub off the side here that's just clutter. You can leave it like that. It's kind of going up, looks weird. Next one there. It's coming this way. It's crashing into this one. We come back here. Okay, there we go. Does that make sense? Yep. Same thing here. These are all coming down. First thing I see is this little twig growing out of the branch bark collar of this one. I'm going to take it off. Now I'm starting to have the palette that I'm really getting to work with. It's a process of elimination. Dead disease, get them out of the way. Old cuts, get them out of the way. That's part of the dead. This one's going down. It's a south or on the back side of the tree, and it's a stub, so I'm going to do that. Well, that looks pretty good. This one's kind of curving and going back that way and crashing into this one. Now that I've done that, I've got this long shoot here without much on it. I'm going to start going back to here now. Does that make sense? It's you can wind up with your veins like this. I don't have that problem. That's why my mother or my wife doesn't let me cut my hair. Neither does my mom. So, you see the goal here is to flow outward, away from each other. You're never going to eliminate the crossing branches on a weeper. Got some crossing branches here. This one's kind of a top tier. It's coming off the top. It's coming over. It looks good. At some point in the future, this one and this one, even though they're originating from different areas, are overlapping each other. This one's going to get less sunlight, so it's going to get less energy. I might as well go ahead and send that energy into the one that I've already pruned on that's in a positive direction. Does that make sense? Yep. That one's kind of growing up and out. What you'll start to see is the weird angled stuff will start to stand out to you. And one of the things that helps with that, I found, is to sort of walk around the tree. People think I'm hunting their trees. I'm not doing this. But what it allows me to see, and from this angle, I can see through the tree, and I can see that this branch is rubbing on that branch. Well, if I free it up, there it is, it's not. And I'll even cross the street, and literally, and I get under my weeper, or under my uprights, and I go like this, because that starts to allow you to see that 3D perspective. You're changing your perspective to give you a little bit more of an honest opinion of where things are going and what things are doing. Try to free them up. Well, if they're crashing, it's an understory. Some people would come in and just clean off all these little ones like this and only leave the bigger structure. I just did. And that's fine. I kind of like the wedding cake look, so I have this cluster of branches, and I have this cluster of branches, and then so on. Do you see that tiering effect that we're getting here? Does everybody feel comfortable about the weepers? All right. One in the back, and then we'll work this way.
I have a very old weeper that was planted too close to the sidewalk, and it's always been cut way back on that side so that it's got all these little side branches that are all along the front. But the other side skirts the ground.
Yep.
So I know you said you can't cut too much off at once. Can you, through successive prunings, cut back the side that's really long then and shape it so that they're equal, or do you always want to leave one side longer?
You want to try to have balance with the tree. The hard part there sometimes is the sunnier side ends up growing more, so you can take a little bit off of that to encourage it. But you want to try to balance the tree, but certainly well-placed cuts on the sidewalk side of the weeping tree is going to get you more success, and then thin that other side. But what that's going to encourage is the plants want to go up. If there's no power lines over it, and if it's a weeper, it's pretty low, there's probably no power lines over it.
I like that extending. I didn't know you could do that. I'm going to see
Yeah.
what I can do with that.
And you can even just take a little short piece of bamboo. If I go down, you all got a CPR or something up front. So actually, I need that. Just kicked you and I need you. So if I were wanting to upright this weeper a little bit more, I would take a piece of bamboo about so long, and I would find a channel here in the bark or in the branches where I can send it, and I'm going to splint it. I'm going to do a tie here, I'm going to do a tie here, I'm going to do a tie here, and I'm going to gently, you don't have to get it perfectly straight, I'm going to loosely tie it. And in fact, if this, instead of being this straight lollipop stick, if I tie it like that, and that trunk has a little dance or a little swagger to it, that looks much more natural than this lollipop stick. So if I were to take this and bend it back and tie it here, and here, and here, and here, and splint it, essentially with a piece of bamboo, and I like using old bike tires or Velcro, the tomato Velcro stuff, because you can move it up and down, you can take it off, put it back on. Don't tie it off with red twisty ties. The wires, all that stuff, it will bind in there. You got to move those tie-offs every year, up or down an inch or two, to prevent girdling.
How long do you leave it? How long does it take to leave it?
Usually 2 to 3 years, and it will hold. So if I do that, then I get canopy to work with. So you could take one of your branches, or even a couple of them, and start sending them up. And you want to do it in a pattern so that they're growing up and outward. So you're just adding a layer of wedding cake on top of the wedding cake you've already got.
So I could take an existing branch that goes outwards and train it to go up then?
If you take a branch that's like this, and you train it like this, there's going to be a north that's going to go, I'm closer to the sun, and go boing. Then you can even come in and take that off and send your road. You get to tell the highway where it's going. Does that make sense? It's not going to, if you're taking a bunch off the sides, 2 little ups aren't going to make up for it. It's going to help. Once again, it's a balance of supply and demand, and you're just trying to help the supply on top where the tree wants to supply itself with anyway, and for the demand that the root system requires. So, you all feel comfortable on weepers? Uprights are much easier. There was one in here that was really wrecked. Okay. Garland employees leave. 2 upright trunks, same diameter, coming from one. It's ideally a challenge because you've got competition here, equal competition. So once again, clean off dead wood. This one doesn't really have much. There's a few little stubs here. Now, I'm going to set it down. I'm going to work the top of this a little bit more. All these little curling branches. And with some of these little stubs down here, if you make a cut, like I said, new will grow. If you rub them off, you're more likely actually to scar that little branch bark collar and discourage those little buds that are going in there from growing, because it doesn't want to grow a bud back down here.
What do you mean by rub them off?
I'll show you. Like that.
All right.
Just rub it off. And what you're doing is, instead of making a nice clean scalpel cut and encouraging the two buds behind it to go boop and wake up, when you're breaking that off, it's much like suckers on a fruit tree. You're trying to tear those things off, because if you cut a sucker, you got 4 suckers the next year. If you rub them off, you're actually going to hopefully gouge into that a little bit, take away some of those reoccurring buds, and the plant doesn't want to grow from down here. It wants to grow up here. So rubbing them off oftentimes discourages regrowth. And one thing, this is probably not the case, but one thing you want to keep an eye out on your maples, does everybody see that dark patch about right there?
Mm-hmm.
Keep an eye on that. See that? That dark tissue necrosis is a bad thing. Not saying that that's what it is. That is a sign for me to go, okay, next year I want to make sure. Take a pad out and paper, write down a few notes, because you might not remember the next year. I don't often. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit. These two are growing from the same spot. That was probably a branch that got, this one started, and then this one decided to grow in. I'm going to start with elimination pruning there. Okay, well, it's growing up and out. It's not bad. This one's crashing. Well, I freed it up. But I want to keep that. There's nothing on this side of the tree that balances that. You want to kind of keep a balance left and right, front and back. So I'm going to go ahead and take that one off. These two are all on one side. So probably I'm looking at my canopy. I'm putting a little bit of a lollipop on it, but it's only a foot off the ground. That lollipop stick's not going to get any taller. So there's a few rubs here. Now I'm starting to get into where I think most of my canopy is going to start probably in this area. So I'm going to go on and go up to here. This is a repeat branch. The little tiny one's repetitive. This one, little crasher here. I'll leave that and see if it wants to fill in this area. This one's headed that way too. I'll let them compete. See what they want to do. These are two. I don't really want to, I don't want any, this is an opportunity for breakage. This pitch with this fork here. And what's interesting is this one is larger diameter than this one. This one should be the leader because it's in the middle of the tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send the roots a message through this trunk when it pulls, because right now this is the leader. It's got the tallest one. That's why it's bigger around. It's because it's got the taller one. So you do what's called suppression pruning. I can back that diameter, or I should say slow that diameter down and encourage bigger diameter on the one that I don't suppression prune. And the suppression prune comes from finding a spot up here that's got a desirable, that's just a really funky union right there. There's just a stub in here that needs to come out so I can be honest with myself about what's going on. So what I'm going to try to do is take off the bud. It's the king bud, I call it. Now I've sent a message just with that one cut. I've sent a message to the trunk, or to the roots, the brain. This ain't the leader anymore. This one is the leader because it's now the tallest. Now here's another taller one that I need to suppress. So I'm just going to come back and do a little, and all you got to do is take that tip bud off. And I'm leaving it in a pattern to where it's going to grow out. That south is going to grow out. The north is going to grow back into it. I'm going to leave it for now. I don't have to take it off now. I'll let it form leaves. Let it build energy with the with the buds I leave behind to power the direction I want it to grow. So you got to leave the engine running and discourage it from just stomping on the gas because you took all the tips off. Can everybody see this branch right here? What's it doing? It's growing out. It's got a big J. It's kind of diving back in. See how it curves back in? That stands out to me. I'm going to take it off. There's some clutter in here. There's one of those little dead things I can, and you can rub buds off up in here too if you can't get your pruners down in there. What time is it? I'm probably running behind. Oh, 10 minutes over. So some maples are very twiggy like this one is, and you can't thin it out enough without encouraging rapid expansion because it's going to make up for what you took off. So this is a crossing branch. It comes out, it crosses over this one. I'm going to take it out.
So on that one, to train the leader, would you splint it, or would it take off by itself?
Would this one?
Yeah.
That I'm trying to drive. What you want to do, you could direct it, you could bend it, but what I'd rather do is use pruning to give it direction. So there's two branches coming out, and they're going kind of. This is just sort of a conglomerate of crisscrossing, and I'm going to choose the ones that are going upward and outward. There's a lot of old stuff on this tree that never got taken off. So this is a initial pruning cut right here. I don't know if I'm trying to figure out an angle so you all can see this. That's going to be the best one. So this one and this one, these are really brittle. I don't want to break them. They come out. Here's the trunk that they come from, and they come out and they immediately twist and go around each other. One of those has to go. Has to. You can't have that. So this one, what's that?
That was outside.
Oh, sorry. So this one kind of has this weird knuckle. It's really the one diving back. This one curves back. So the diving back guy goes. See that? See how that freed that up? I've got a couple parallels here. This one's curving back in. I want to free them up, making sure that's actually not too congested. So this one is now the leader. It's on the one that I want to fatten up, the one in the middle, but it's kind of off to the side. It's going to encourage itself over this one over here to be fatter than this one. So what I want to do is actually take that one off. I'm going to take it all the way back because that's going to free up some space for this one. Now this is my tallest one. I don't want my tallest one to be out on a limb. Pines are ridiculous. I'm sorry, I've never been so impressed with my puns. So now this one's the tallest. It's got a side branch that's shorter, and it's about the height of the one I want to encourage. So I'm going to take it off. I opened up space as well. So really, these two are the ones I'm trying to encourage. It's not to say that this taller one here couldn't come off. It's never going to be that single leader maple tree. These just don't do that naturally. So what I'm trying to do is select a few that can be the leader. Now this one's the tallest. It's coming off the desirable, what I'll call main trunk. It's kind of coming out. I've already taken a few tops off. I'm going to leave it. I'll consider taking it off next year. I could. Suppression pruning doesn't mean totally removing it. Now I'm going to go ahead and do it. We're going to challenge this tree a little. I'm going to just take it back to a thinning cut with side roads that already exist in a positive direction. I'm going to do the same thing here. Now, much more balanced. There's one that's taller on this one. it's kind of jaying out. I call them jays because they look like a jay there. And it bouquets back, or it kind of goes back in. So I'm going to take that one off. And like I said, I would normally do this pruning over a couple of years. I probably would have stopped once I did some of the suppression pruning over here. Yes?
I have a tall upright one that is kind of close to the house where the roof comes out.
Yep.
And it's very open. So is there a way to encourage these little branchlets down below?
So I just want to understand it. So your house is here and the branches are coming over the trying to keep your gutters clean.
Yeah.
What you want to do is follow that back to a point. Either eliminate the problem altogether back to where it comes off the trunk and just know that branch is going to go away, which is a chunk.
It is.
Most likely. So that could be your 120%, one cut, bam, you're done. Or you could follow it back to an east and a west, or a north and a south. You don't want to send the south into the house, but if the north then, instead of it being like this, if the north is then just a little bit more upright and not hanging so much over the house, you could do that to an existing. To encourage more branching down below, you would do the big cut. Take it off at its point of origin. Like I said, with folks that have the sidewalk, I'm going to keep pruning here, crashing. Folks that have the sidewalk situation, and they tend to take it off just where they need it to be. Well, it's going to grow 10 inches the next year. Follow it back to where it can grow back out and not hit you right away, knowing in a couple of years you're going to take another branch off and do the same
The tree's
thing.
at least 40 years old.
Yep.
And I don't want to be the one that takes it out.
Yeah.
And somebody else in the future take it out and put
It
something
could
else in.
certainly be worked with. And I do have coupons for folks if they want. They were having me give these coupons out for 10% off a pruner. So I'm going to leave them over here. And one per customer, please. I'll just set them right there. So grab one of those. And I have some cards up here for my services if anybody's interested. Come see me at the end here. We're getting close to the end. So this branch is just diving kind of wacky back into the middle. I don't see any more major, there's some dead stuff on here that's just gray. I don't see any more major things that I'm willing to deal with. Here's a crossing branch. Oh. 10% off a pruner. So,
Probably right.
yeah.
So now, since this is a very twiggy tree, and you've taken a lot off, is it going to twig up some more, quite a bit?
I have probably taken off, I would say this is going to throw a mild tantrum versus just a regrowth pattern.
Because there was a lot that came off down off the trunk as well.
Right. And this isn't as impactful as this is, because this is already in its own shadow.
Okay.
So I'm going to hit this coral bark real quick because they're a very popular variety. Sorry we're running long.
Can I ask you about vine maple? Is vine maple in its own category, or because we have a really tall one that we had to cut to get off the roof?
Yep.
And there's just a trunk going up. Is that gonna? Should I take that all the way back down?
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to follow the same principles. It's a different species of maple. It's still an acer, so it's got the north, south, east, west. So you get to play on the same court. You just aren't dealing with the same leaf pattern, essentially, or I should say leaf shape, really. It's going to follow the north, south, east, west thing. So we're going to, this thing's too heavy for me to pick up. Yeah, that's not going to hold it. Hate to say it, but one of the first cuts I would make on this maple tree is to take this whole thing off.
Oh my goodness.
If you look up here, you'll see why. I can't lift it. That is a no-no. I'm not going to make the cuts on.
Oh, okay.
I'm not going to abuse. I would take this thing off right here if it were my tree, but it's not. All right, so I'm going to leave it. But thank you for the offer. So with the coral bark maples, I mean that would be one cut that would be your 20% right away, but it needs to happen. That's just not a healthy union. I don't. Yeah, I guess.
And those ties are growing into the bark.
Yep, and those need to be taken off. This.
Abuse the tree.
What's that?
You got to sign up to abuse the tree because otherwise we're gonna do it.
Oh, okay. So that's. First of all, I'm going to do exactly what you said. It doesn't need these anymore, and they're biting in. It is so in there that the root system is growing around it. There's the splint that anybody needs for their other tree. So, coral bark maples are a bouquet shape. You want to encourage upward and outward. This is a really bad union. That is going to get heavy snow load, and it's going to break. And it's running very narrow, and that means it can split easily. If it's a 45, much like what you get up here, it's much more healthy of a branch attachment. So I'm going to reduce weight first. I know. Better put the price tag back on. And you would think it's going down in price, but it's actually going to go up because of professional purchase. Dramatic, big cut right there.
Yes.
Technically, that's 20%, at least.
Too bad it's not Christmas to use those for.
They were holding it for my class.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is it still considered winter time now?
Yeah. Yeah. The buds aren't swelling. They're swelling a little bit, but you're not seeing any leaf expansion. You're not seeing.
Go home and prune mine.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm in full bore right now. It's the season. So the challenge is getting into that little nook and cranny, and I'm going to have to use. Woo, yay, power tools!
I was just gonna say, from experience, there are two types of reciprocating blades. So get the number off your saw before you go buy one, so you don't have to go back to Home Depot.
You mean the way that they attach?
Yes.
Yeah.
There
I've
are
always
two,
had this one, so yeah. I know the skill saws have two different.
Yeah.
There's a fork and a. Of course,
and
I always
even
have
the
the one
person
that.
at Home Depot said, "Oh no, they'll fit every saw." And
Yeah.
Two
Sorry.
trips.
Glad
So-
you said that.
Yep.
So I took the weight off. Now I'm going to make my precise cut, and I'm actually going to make this cut. I'm going to get all the other stuff out of the way so you can see this. This little branch right here, I'm going to go ahead and take off. It's actually on the desirable, but I'm just getting it out of the way for you all to be able to see this. Now, my branch bark ridge is right, and I'll mark it so you all can see it. What I'm trying to stay out of for this cut is that. Can you see that? I know it's tough to see down here, so I'm going to be really careful to start above. Very nice. There you go. And you can still see the puckered lips in there. Should be good. All right.
Looks good too.
Yeah, so now you see that upright bouquet shape. So let's keep working that. Clutter. See that clutter?
Yeah.
And see that clutter? Something's got to happen there. Pull them out of the way, see what happens. Well, that one, it's going up into an open space, but it kind of throws the vase shape way out. The other options here are this one, and it curves back in and crashes that way. It does have some side branches off of there. I do have a balancing branch on this side. You see that? That's why I'm not taking the whole thing off. I'm leaving it on now. I may take both of them off later. This one is out of my vase shape. This other one, ironically enough, that's coming from this one is out of my vase shape. This one's kind of wonky and going crazy, diving back in. So, too wide, cut. Diving back in, but there's a side branch that's not diving back in. This one's outside of my vase. This one's a little bit wonky. So just for purposes of leaving some material on, if this were my tree, next year I'm taking these two and this one off. My canopy is going to start right here. Everybody see this? So, pros and cons. This with one on the inside is growing up. It's a nice part of the canopy. The other one is going out. It's a nice part of the canopy. It's got a side branch that's going up, kind of crashing over that way. So that's a con. And the other part of that one that's diving this way is also diving back this way. So I'm going to want to take the diver off. I just want to, it's a process of elimination, and little bit at a time. I still have this cross. If I take this one off, what's going to fill in? These up here, they're going to fill in that canopy. If I take this one off, that one leaves a nice balance to that side. This one comes out. There's plenty on this side to work with. So I'm going to go in and take that one off. And I'm taking off the one that's closer to the main trunk. See that? So this is the challenging part is, and I'm actually pushing my pruners that way as I make this cut. To force my, I'm not pulling my blade through the cut like that. I'm pushing my blade through. Did you see what the difference there? I'm actually forcing this blade up against the anvil part of it. It's not anvil pruner, but does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, I've cleared up the big crash over here. This one, it's growing right from below the one I just put all that work into. It's growing right up next to it at the base there. And coral bark maples are notoriously twiggy. They just are. See that? Now, if I take that off, I've bared this side of the tree up. So what I'm going to do is there's a dormant bud right there that if it grows in the direction it's pointing, it'll be good. So for now, I'm just going to do that. See what happens. I'm not going to eliminate all of the crossing branches on this tree all at one time. There's just no way to do that. These are just inherently twiggy. I'm not going to do any more to this tree except for clean this stub up. And you can actually see, I'm going to leave it on here. If you look at this cut that was made, there is a little blackening. That's normal. That's the healing. There's a little bud right there that's waking up. You can actually see it waking up, which will send out two branches. I'm going to leave that on there, so take a look at that. So that's an example of a cut that is spurring new off-ramps. The dreaded pitchfork. See that? Mm-hmm. The dreaded pitchfork. You can keep the one in the middle, you can take the two on the sides. It's not a healthy union, because when you have two branches that are growing into each other, they never fuse together. They're always pushing against each other. They're trying to push the other one away by getting fatter. So they will never fuse together. They will never be happy together. They're going to push each other, and if you have a branches that are like this and this one's getting pushed and it gets a snow load, it's going to break and peel. So we're going to eliminate the one in the middle. I could take just one side of the pitchfork off and leave these two and take this one off. So through process of elimination, you're going to help me pick this one. Yep. So this is the pitchfork we're dealing with. This one is diving back in. This one that's in the middle is coming out into an open space. This one's kind of curving and going that way. And it's okay that they do a little dance. That's fine. If this were your tree, which one would you cut off? This one, or this one, or this one? It's growing open into an open space. This one's diving back in, crashing into your leader.
Okay, take that.
There. See, no pitchfork. Everybody gets to go in their own happy direction, not crashing. Like I said, there's other things like this. Just conglomerate of branches needs to be thinned down. There's a pitchfork. These three here. This one's okay. The one in the middle's okay. The one here is actually crashing into the ones I just worked on. So I'm gonna attempt to take that off. There. We got another weird conglomeration of pitchforks here. This one is growing into a happy direction. These are happy. This, I feel like Bob Ross. Happy little branches. This one is growing from the middle. This one is growing from the middle of these two, and it's crashing into this one. It's got this weird J shape to it. So,
which one's going to be your main trunk?
most likely this one.
Okay.
It's already got the bud, the dominant bud. Now with these trees, you don't have one single. Most Japanese maples, you have 4, 5, or a dozen. But you try to encourage the ones in the center to be a little taller. Not always possible, and it's okay that some of the outer reaching ones are taller, just making sure that you're not letting them take over with suppression pruning. And suppression pruning just means taking that bud off, taking the balance of that hormone away, even if it's just literally to the next one down, to send that message to the root. This is not the leader, this is the leader. Suppression pruning. So, anybody have any questions?
So all those little branches that are kind of closer to the bottom.
Like these?
Yeah.
They're clutter.
Okay.
This one's okay. I'm only taking them off if I have to.
Okay.
Since I did a major cut here, I really should stop at this tree now. One big cut and making sure it's happy and healthy by no major crossing, rubbing branches. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, but be aware. Know what varieties you're dealing with. This is a notoriously wispy, wiry looking one. My 2-year-old got a hold of this one.
Aww.
She likes covers. This is J.D. Vertrees, and Gregory is the other gentleman's last name. This is a maple book that just tells you all the different varieties. This one is 20 years old. Know your variety. They all have their own quirks. Orangiola is a weeper that likes to do this. Moonglow is an upright that likes to do this. It's not like this. It likes to bow, which is the beauty of it. So pruning to be aware of that and accommodate that is critical. So if anybody, I do pruning. I also do consultations. I charge $45 an hour. I have a 1-hour minimum. Don't go to Facebook on here. Somebody broke into my account and I've just discontinued it and quit touching the one that was there. So don't go to Facebook like it says on the back, but list of different stuff I do on the back. So if anybody wants one of these, here they are. And I also do all types of consultations. Is this the right place? What is it? I've done everything from managing arboretums to being the head grower at a Peoria Gardens. I worked at Peoria Gardens for 4 years,
So you
perennial
do
production
all
manager.
kinds, all kinds and varieties?
Everything.
Okay.
If it has to do with plants, I do it.
I've got a tree that's probably 20 years old. How much of this applies to something?
All of it.
All of it?
Younger
Just higher
tree-
up.
Yeah, exactly. You're using a ladder and a pole pruner. Younger trees can tolerate less without throwing a tantrum. They're like kids. You can tell an adult they'll sit in the corner and be quiet, and they'll do it. They won't be happy about it. But a kid, you're going to have to put them in the chair, and they're going to throw a tantrum. So young trees should be pruned a little less. So maybe you're doing 15 to 10% on a small young tree. Let it grow. Let it build that energy. The leaf is the energy source. So let it have leaves. You can always take it off later, 3, 4, 5 years down the road.
Between the two of us, we can do the right thing.
Is that good? Thank you all very much for coming out.